price tag to point out that the new aircraft carrier will not be carrying any aircraft for some time. Perhaps that's not the point. It's created jobs in Scotland. That's jobs in Scotland before a referendum, you understand. And it's given the nation a sense of its naval military pride once again, reminded the world of our commitment to the defence industry and indeed defence. But returning just for a moment to the £6.2 billion price tag, can we honestly say that it's worth it? Here's our policy editor, Chris Cook.
The Second World War, the Falklands, the Balkans, the Gulf, Afghanistan, scores of humanitarian efforts. Aircraft carriers are mainstays of British sea power. And today, one Queen Elizabeth christened another. A new carrier was named in Rosyth, the first of two on the production line. These ships are expensive, costing £6 billion a pair. But they do last a long time. The Queen named HMS Eagle back in 1946. A ship that was commissioned by Churchill's wartime government, and Britain has replaced its carriers only once since then. The new ship is expected to last in service into the 2060s. The Queen Elizabeth and its sister, the much less complete Prince of Wales, are vast, with a deck area of roughly 2 football pitches. Now, that's not as big as the Chinese carrier, nor the US supercarriers, but it's still huge. And it's also a bit of a moment for Britain, which is currently without an aircraft carrier that can field planes.
HMS Queen Elizabeth and HMS Prince of Wales.
But there are questions over the effectiveness of the investment. First, Queen Elizabeth won't be fully kitted out until 2020. Second, the government is yet to decide whether to sell or to mothball the Prince of Wales. Third, crucially, only 48 of the F-35 planes that will fly off the ships are on order. More will come, but we don't know how many. And finally, even if we get these ships kitted out well, do we have the ships that we need to protect the carriers?
The science, in terms of protecting a carrier, requires a force of between 5 and 7 destroyers alone, and then a similar size number of frigates. The destroyers defend against air attack and missiles. The frigates protect against submarines and mines. Now, the UK only possesses 19 frigates and destroyers combined, so there probably isn't the number of ships that you require to protect this carrier if you don't want to associate some sort of risk with it.
So if we don't spend money on the planes that make carriers into weapons, or the supporting ships that allow them to roam, might this Royal Ark be remembered as a national vanity project?
Chris Cook there. Now joining me is the Admiral Lord West, former First Sea Lord, and Professor Mary Calder, Professor of Global Governance at the LSE. Thank you both very much for coming in. Lord West, what is the point of this ship?
Well, it gives us the capability of deploying military power globally, and we are still a global nation. We're the 6th richest country in the world, and our wealth, a lot of it depends on the fact that we run global shipping from the UK. That global shipping is crucial to the wealth of the global village. We're the biggest European investor in most parts of the world, and therefore the stability of the globe is very, very important.
But it requires most of the Royal Navy to support it and protect it.
Well, sorry, the young man speaking from Russia, I'm old enough now to call him a young man, has got his figures wrong. You actually need, well, I've actually done this at sea, and I've fought. I can tell you, what you need, you'd need 2 Type 45s with it, probably 3 or 4 ASW frigates, and maybe 1 or 2 nuclear submarines. We can provide that force. We've got too few ships, I'd agree with that, because we've had too many cuts for too many years.
It's quite a lot of stuff, though, isn't it? I mean, you know, even when we actually did something, we went into Sierra Leone, it was with a ship half that size.
But that force that we're talking about there is if you're fighting against someone like the Chinese, and that's not what this is doing all the time. Well, we don't know what will happen. The great thing in the military is you don't know what will happen. People told me you'll never have to fight anyone apart from the Soviets. I was sunk in the Falklands. None of us know what's going to happen, and that's what the military has to do, is be ready for the unknown.
And this is about statecraft, and this is about an important projection of our power and our place in the world, as well as protecting against the unknown, isn't it?
Well, that's what it's meant to be about, but I actually think our place in the world would be much better assured if we could really continue to play an active role in all kinds of humanitarian crises, conflicts, natural disasters. And the problem with this is that it's so expensive, everything is focused on these two carriers, that we're having to cut everything that might be useful for these other purposes.
I mean, the humanitarian argument, presumably you'd get rid of all spending on defence then, would you?
Well, I would get rid of spending on what I call baroque military technology, which is exactly which the aircraft carrier is.
What does that mean in the layman's term?
What it means is, it means things like the aircraft carrier, the Eurofighter, Trident, which become more and more expensive with every generation and less useful. They are developed beyond the point of cost effectiveness. And so much is focused on them, they become complex, they need more and more parts, they're liable to break down, they're liable not to work, and at the same time, everything else is squeezed. I think they're about what we used to call during the Cold War the military-industrial complex. I think they're about a combination of the armed forces wanting to reassert their traditional roles, and us wanting defence industrial capacity to meet those roles.
I mean, I have to say, I think that's totally wrong. For a start, the carriers will run better than the old carriers. Things used to break down more than they do now. But look at the cost. What is the cost over 50 years, the capital cost per year? 6 million. I think we've spent, I was reading it today, 1 trillion the West has spent on aid in the Horn of Africa since 1960, and the average wealth of each person has gone down. Now, the only way you can get to places to actually do things like help them out very often when there's a disaster is by sea, in a ship. This carrier will be brilliant at that.
That's an argument in favour of humanitarian usefulness. If you relinquish this and we became a less valuable partner in...
But we wouldn't. We're really good at these things. We've had to cut the army. You really need people. You need a mixture of civilian and military capabilities. You need lower tech and a lot more of it. We need more transport capabilities.
But you can't swim to where these things happen.
We could.
Lots of soldiers can't swim.
You can take smaller boats.
You can take smaller boats.
Ships,
please.
Ships, please. We've all said it.
But the joy of this ship, the scale of the ship, it isn't, as I say, it's 6 million a year. Each year is a capital cost for this. 6 million a year is nothing.
What about the jobs? I mean, 10,000 jobs sustained on a project like that. Doesn't it wash its face with that number alone?
Well, if you put the same money into investment into, for instance, energy efficiency or renewable energy, you would not only create the same number of jobs, but it would have a multiplier effect on growth, and it would be much more effective at creating jobs. The military-industrial complex operates
in the sky.
But you operates like the old Soviet Union.
Or perhaps fighting a war with the Chinese. Wouldn't that be a cyber war?
What I'm saying is, we do not know what will happen, and you need to have equipment in the military. You need to plan for the unexpected. That's what we do for the nation. And actually, that is not, as I say, 6 million a year over 50 years is not a lot of money.
We've run out. I'm so sorry. Thank you both very much indeed. That is it for tonight, but we leave you with news of a psychology experiment at Harvard University which revealed that most men, and some women, would choose to give themselves painful electric shocks rather than be bored for 15 minutes. Here at Newsnight, we're always looking for new ways to make the important questions interesting. So today we begin the first field tests. Good night.
Can anyone put their hand on their heart and say if Scotland separated itself from the United Kingdom, what the currency would be? Can anybody say for certainty whether Scotland would be in the European Union, waiting to get into the European Union, how long that would take? No. Can we be certain about whether Scotland would still have a place in NATO? Can we be certain about what the costs of separation are? No. None of the key questions have been answered.